The man who gave us the compulsory superannuation system back in the 1980s was Paul Keating, and he joins me in the studio tonight. Welcome back to 7:30, Mr Keating.
Thank you, Laura. Lovely to be here.
Data released today suggests we will soon see the first current account surplus since 1975. And the current account was one of the issues that you were grappling with as Treasurer in the late 1980s, along with a terrible national savings and productivity record and an increasingly unaffordable aged pensions bill when you proposed a national compulsory superannuation system. It was designed to deal with all of those problems at once, wasn't it?
It was, and it is dealing with them. You can see it in today's current account, today's trade figures and the current account deficit. And you're correct in saying when you and I used to go to press conferences in the Canberra Gallery in the 80s, the current account deficit was around 5% of GDP. Very big. In other words, we had a begging bowl out to the rest of the world saying, please provide us the capital, because we were capital poor. Now the current account deficit is under 1% of GDP. It's gone from 5 to under 1. And the trade surplus is appearing for the first time in a long time. And that's because the pool of Australian retirement savings in super at 3 trillion are now bigger than the free reserves of China. 24 million of us, of 25 million of us, and 3 trillion. So we've now got lots of investments abroad. So the income from those investments abroad, that's the interest and the capital returns, offsetting interest and dividends out of Australia for foreign investment, means the current account deficit is improving structurally. This could not happen without superannuation.
Well, why is it under such assault on a regular basis? We're always having reviews, we're always having it attacked.
Because we've got these sort of, it's like climate deniers. We've got a bunch of people in the Liberal Party who've always hated superannuation, and they're super deniers. They're superannuation deniers. Someone said yesterday, pithily, they're like anti-vaxxers. They're against vaccine, you know. This thing has virtually wiped out the current account deficit. It's dropped the call on the age saving, on the age pension, the call on the budget from roughly 4 to 5% of GDP to currently 2.4. The European average is 8%. We're at 2.4, and for each Australian person at work, the average accumulation is now $225,000. So in the recent American survey, household survey, only 55% of Americans could lay their hands on only $10,000. 55% of the American working community could put their hands on $10,000. The average for us is $225,000. And in 8 years, that will be $500,000. In 8 years after that, it will be $1 million. In 8 years after that, it'll be $2 million. To try, and this only comes because of the compulsion. Otherwise, people don't save and wouldn't have the incentive to save.
It hasn't increased as much as you wanted it to until now. Yeah. So people are not self-reliant as you hoped they would be. Right. So there is still a reliance on the pension, which makes the system vulnerable and open to question, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, John Howard knocked off the last 3% I had in the 1996 budget, right, 5-6 budget. So it was going to 12. And then when Kevin Rudd and Wayne Swan put the 3% back, Joe Hockey, with the vote of Mr Palmer in the Palmer party in the Senate, by one vote, he jammed it at 9.5%. So if you work it out, Laura, for most people have 9% super. If you lose 3, you lose 1/3 of it. So if you have 300,000, you would have had 400,000, right? If you've got 230,000, you would have now 300,000. I mean, Howard and Hockey cost the average worker 100,000 as of now. As of now.
Well, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer have said that they will commit, they're committed to the 12%.
That's good.
But some government backbenchers are clearly urging that it not go ahead, along with the Treasury and others. They're saying the high cost of superannuation would further reduce the prospect of wage increases.
Yeah, well, this is the great lie. You see, this is the bodgy analysis of the Grattan Institute, along with the Financial Review. There's a sort of, I won't go so far as to call it a conspiracy, but it nearly touches that, right? They're saying this, look, if you don't have an increase in superannuation, or if you do, you'll lose it in wages. So if you take the superannuation, the 2.5% extra, you'll lose a wage increase. Alternatively, if you don't take the 2.5%, you pick up 2.5% wages. But it's demonstrably false because nobody since 2014 has had any increase in super. There's been no 2.5%, yet wages are not increased at all.
But can you understand the potency of the argument, the political potency of the argument to voters who haven't seen a decent pay rise in years, if people are saying to them that superannuation poses an even bigger threat to them getting further pay rises?
Yeah, but they're not going to, in this technology-driven, low inflation environment, they're not going to get wage increases, Laura. So it's a 2.5% super or nothing. You see, the Parliament has currently legislated 2.5% extra super from 2021 to 2025. That's 2.5% of income. Whether you take it as savings and super or you get it as cash, it's still 2.5% of income. If this is refused, essentially what a Liberal government would be doing would be pilfering, stealing, robbing the workforce of 2.5% of income.
Sorry, are you saying that there's no prospect in the future, in the current environment, of people getting pay rises? And does that suggest that the push towards free markets, which you began, has actually gone too far?
No, it's because the enterprise bargaining system I set up, which had those massive wage increases, just remember, we've had a 60% increase in wages since 1992. You can't confuse rates and levels. The level of wages is 60% higher than 1992. It's just that they're not increasing. And they're not increasing because the fact that the simplicity of the system I introduced has been warped by Howard with his work choices and then the Gillard government with its remedies. Get back to my system and people will start to get real wage increases again. But when I introduced this system 30 odd years ago, people they retired about 65 and died roughly about 85, 86. But in those 30 years, people are living 6 years, whoops, lost my glasses, 6 years longer. So 9.5 is just not enough. You can't stretch the pool to cover you till age 91 or 92 from 9.5%. It has to go to 12.
These changes were staunchly resisted at the time, along with some of the other policies like the fringe benefits tax and capital gains tax. Is there room for brave policy anymore?
Well, providing the straight lines of logic are there, and people in public life mean to do what is right, what is good, and what is true.
But wasn't one of the lessons of the election campaign that oppositions shouldn't be brave?
No, I don't think it's one of the lessons at all. I think if you're talking about the Labor Party and why it lost the election, it failed to understand the middle class economy that Bob Hawke and I created for Australia. And so much of Labor Party's policies were devoted to the bottom end of the workforce and the community, paid for by cuts in tax expenditures. If the cuts in tax expenditures had have been employed in reducing tax rates, then it would have been a big tax reform and I believe a much more successful outcome. But instead of that, the Labor Party was actually increasing the top rate of tax from 45 to 47%, which of course in public I opposed.
So at the next election, given the way the budget's going, do you think there is room for another big change in the tax mix, that we broaden the base essentially, as we used to say?
They do what I did in the 80s, that is, you broaden the base, fringe benefits, capital gains, the abolition of entertainment as a deduction, and cut the rates. See, I cut the top marginal rate from 60 under John Howard to 47%. It's still at 45 now, 30 years later. I mean, how pathetic is that? The top marginal rate in Australia shouldn't be a jot over 39%.
Over the weekend, we saw a step up in pressure on Australia from the United States to take sides in its strategic battle with China. If I could ask you what I asked Hugh White last night, Defence Secretary Esper seems to have laid the ground for a new arms race in the region. Should we be alarmed about that?
Well, put it this way, let the Americans do what they wish to do themselves. But intermediate range missiles have always been part and parcel of the American submarine fleet anyway. when they were removed in Europe, the only reason they were ever land-based intermediate missiles were placed in Europe is because the Europeans were worried about the old Soviet Union, and they had the Americans place them there. Of course, Reagan and Gorbachev took them away. China was never part of that treaty, so it's got hundreds of intermediate range nuclear missiles. So whether the Americans want to have a capacity for intermediate range use on their submarines is one thing, but putting them on land bases is entirely another. You know, and particularly land-based ones focused on China. Like, we should have no bar of having American intermediate range missiles stationed in this country directed towards the Chinese.
How dangerous is it for Australia in terms of its relation with China for us to have been put on the spot like this?
Well, you know, Pompeo, look, the Americans know we have difficulties currently with the Chinese, you know, brought about by the Turnbull government and more locally, you know. So a little bit of diplomacy and manners wouldn't have gone astray. But Pompeo rides into town, doing the Rodney Rude Act, you know, saying you either have, you know, soybeans or you look after your soul, or words to that effect. What did he say? something, you know. I mean, the only thing to know about American Secretaries of State these days is under Trump they don't last long.
Mr Keating, thanks for joining us tonight.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.